namely the carbon dioxide, or the CO2, which contributes negatively to the ongoing battle with climate change. It also comprises of many other impacts those greenhouse gases are having on the planet, which even includes some regions getting colder. So because of the greenhouse gases emissions, some areas are experiencing extreme hot or extreme temperature, while other areas or other regions are experiencing more rainfall. On the other hand, global warming refers to a steady and consistent rise in global temperatures, and is therefore only one aspect of the broader phenomenon of climate change. Though the Earth's temperature fluctuates over long periods of time, hundreds to thousands of years, the term global warming most commonly refers to the rising temperatures brought on by human activities over the last 100 to 150 years. In short, global warming refers only to the Earth's rising temperature, while climate change includes warming and the side effects of warming, like melting glaciers, which is happening on some parts of Antarctica, and also heavier rainfalls or more frequent drought. So let's proceed to the main causes of climate change that will be discussed by Mr. Bon Luis Baron.
Thank you, Austin. Good Good evening, everyone. I am here to discuss the main causes of climate change. Before I discuss the three prime examples given, let me explain what are common between the three of them. All three of them are the main causes of the production of greenhouse gases, as mentioned earlier, mainly methane, nitrogen, and especially carbon dioxide. All of these gases are all of these gases traps heat from our planet. That heat causes climate change. On our first example, humanity's increased use of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are such as coal, oil, and gas. We know that to produce power, we burn these fuels, and the burning of these fossil fuels is the result in producing carbon dioxide. Second is deforestation. Because living trees absorb and store carbon dioxide, when we cut down tree, it releases those carbon dioxide. And we know that greenhouse gases are naturally occurring because humans are producing more in which nature is can process less. This is the main the main cause of having imbalance in nature. And the third is increasingly intensive agriculture. We know that our farming materials, our farming tools, equipments uses fuels, which produces carbon dioxide. And secondly, because of the increase in demand of food, we use fertilizer. Even natural fertilizer has nitrogen, and nitrogen, when used, is released into the atmosphere, and uh, and methane, which is commonly found in cow manure, also releases greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to discuss the effects of climate change. We categorize the effects of climate change into two. The first is that the direct consequences of man-made climate change. This includes are the rising maximum temperatures, rising minimum temperatures, rising sea levels, higher ocean temperatures, an increase in heavy precipitation, which we are experiencing in our country, shrinking glaciers, and the thawing permafrost. The second one is the indirect consequences of climate change, which directly affects us humans and our environment. This includes an increase in hunger and water crisis, especially in the developing countries, health risks, through rising air temperatures and heat waves, economic implication of dealing with secondary related to climate change, and the last one is the increasing spread of pests and pathogens and many more. And that's all in the climate change. We'll proceed to the another topic of our reporting, which is the energy crisis.
Good afternoon. I will be discussing about energy crisis. Energy crisis is energy consumption have soared drastically over the last 2 centuries, mainly because the world continues to industrialize. However, utilization of fossil fuel causes pollution and its reserve is finite. It is to our knowledge that these resources are limited and eventually face another crisis, the energy crisis. The energy crisis is the concern that the world's demand on the limited natural resources that are used to power industrial society are diminishing as the demand rises. These natural resources are in limited supply. While they do occur naturally, it can take hundreds of years to replenish the stores. So, what are the limited natural resources? So, the limited natural resources here are the fossil fuels, coals, uranium, and natural gases that are used for non renewable energy resources. Why why is it that despite having renewable energy, many industries still uses non-renewable energy? According to Consumer Affairs, non-renewable energy sources usually have a large amount of energy stored in them, and this energy is easier to harness. So for example, if we use solar power plant that is considered to be renewable energy, a form of renewable energy, it only has a 15 to 22% efficiency compared to fossil fuel efficiency, which has a 20% to 40% efficiency. So that would be all. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I will be reporting the how does climate change contribute to energy crisis? In year 2015, it was predicted that there will be more blackouts or brownouts in the Philippines, which we are experiencing right now. One of the causes is climate change. So the continuing rise in temperature will contribute to increased energy demand as well as replace and new alternatives to produce and supply electricity efficiently. Increased frequency of storms and rise of sea levels can potentially halt energy supply as it damages power plants, power grids, and electricity infrastructure. Climate change has the capacity to affect hydroelectric power plants since scarcity is caused by increased weather and droughts. Countries that experience winter are vulnerable to shortage of heating oil and wood. Meanwhile, tropical countries like the Philippines is likely to consume electricity for cooling and refrigeration purposes. So, a missing but crucial prerequisite to all our methods of addressing major problems like climate change and energy crisis is putting the right people in charge and how to select them. There is hardly a better way as shown by developed and developing countries. We have tried them all, always with the thought that we have put the right people in charge. But our problems in education, science, energy, and nearly all others have become worse. You know, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon po. I'll be reporting about the effects of energy crisis. For the first effect, um, we can see today that the trend the the human population is gradually increasing. Since the population is increasing, therefore the demand for oil and gas will also increase for the needs of the people. So that is the first effect. The demand of oil will increase. And since the demand will increase, its price will also increase. For the second effect, energy crisis is indeed a crisis because it leads to another crisis that is environmental crisis. It is because when we use oil, it emits an it emits carbon dioxide, resulting in global warming. For the last effect, um, oil price hike leading to expensive transportations. So the as I said in the first effect, if the price of the oil increases, it affects the price of other things sa- related to oil. Products and goods are also susceptible in price increase, especially if products are out of region.
So, good evening, everyone. My name is Catalanata, and I'm going to report the energy crisis prevention. Energy transition to renewable energy sources. Compared to fossil fuels, renewable energy does not emit greenhouse gases. This produces a sustainable sources of energy that is both helpful to the environment and human health. Examples of the renewable energy sources are the hyd- hydropower plant captures the energy of falling water to generate electricity, and the turbine converts the kinetic energy of falling water into mechanical energy. Then the generator converts the mechanical energy from the turbine into the electrical energy. The example of hydroelectric power plant in the Philippines are the hydroelectric power plant in Marawi, Lanao del Sur, the Agua Grande hydroelectric power plant in Pagudpod, Ilocos Norte, and the Angat hydroelectric power plant in the Norsagaray, Bulacan. Next is the solar energy. Solar energy power plant is based on the conversion of sunlight into electricity, either directly using photovoltaics or indirectly using concentrated solar power. The example of solar power plant in the Philippines are the Calatagan Solar Power Plant. It is the largest solar facility in Luzon, which is 200,000 Trinas solar that is installed in the Luzon. This facility is generating enough power for the whole of the western Batangas province. Next is the geothermal energy power plant. Geothermal power plants use hydrothermal resources that have both water and heat. Geothermal power plants require high temperature, which is 300 degree Fahrenheit to 700 degree Fahrenheit. Hydrothermal resources that come from either dry steam wells or from hot water wells. Example of geothermal power plants are the Nasulo geothermal power plant in Valencia, Negros Oriental, and the Tiwi geothermal power plant in Tiwi, Albay. Next is the wind energy. Wind energy, wind power generation means getting the electrical energy by converting wind energy into rotating energy of the blades and converting that rotating energy into electrical energy by the generator. Wind energy increases with the cube of wind speed, therefore, the WTG should be installed in the higher wind speed area. Example of the wind power energy are the Burgos Wind Farm located in the Luzon. The south it is Burgos Wind Farm is the largest wind power project in Southeast Asia. Next is the biomass power plant. Biomass power plant produces biogas from the wood, mainly comprising forest residue. and then burn it to produce heat for power generation. The plant also provides 170 MW of district heating. The power plant involved the construction of an advanced gasifier and modification of existing coal boiler. Example of the biomass in the Philippines. Example of the biomass power plant in the Philippines are the Asia Gas Corporation in Lian, Batangas, the San Carlos Biopower in San Carlos, Negros Occidental, and the Isabela Biomass Energy Corporation in Alicia, Isabela. Next is the nuclear energy. Nuclear energy. Nuclear energy may not be considered as a renewable energy sources. However, scientists consider it to be a clean source of energy. Nuclear fission of U-235 to boil a large volume of water to spin a turbine. Example of the nuclear power plants in the Philippines are the BNCP or the Bataan Nuclear Power Plant. But Bataan Nuclear Power Plant is, is still considering the plant sitting issue.
And that's all po, sir. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Thank you, Climate Change and Energy Crisis
There's
Group,
still
for.
uncertainty about the Bataan Nuclear Power Plant. Scientists still consider the eruption of history of Mount Natif a volcano only a few miles away. Because of this problem and the proximity of the active faults, seismologists are proposing to set up more sensors to do testing before considering the opening of Bataan Nuclear Power Plant to electric generation.
Hello. Okay na ba yung group? Hello? Hello, class? Or
Yes, sir. Oh, okay, okay na
okay.
po.
So I would like to commend the group for a very informative presentation. So they have also discussed the what is climate change, causes of climate change, effect of climate change, what is energy crisis, and how does it affect, or how does climate change contribute to energy crisis. Also, nagbigay din sila ng effect of energy crisis. Also, they also given us an alternative energy resources. We will further discuss that with the other groups. So, malalaman nyo dun yung mga thorough details regarding alternative energy resources. Regarding sa prevention, and medyo kulang tayo dun sa climate change laws and policies na meron tayo dito sa Philippines. I-add ko lang, class, we have a Climate Change Act of 2009. So this act, this or Republic Act 9729 is established the Climate Change Commission, or CCC, under the Office of the President. So the primary principles of this policy making, it is a policy making authority, the task to coordinate, monitor, and evaluate the programs and action plans of the government related to climate change. So we also have a national framework strategy on climate change. So yung NSFCC, or the National Framework Strategy on Climate Change, lays the foundation for the national and local government policies towards climate resilient Philippines with a healthy, safe, prosperous, and self-reliant community. So meron din tayong National Climate Change Action Plan, or NCCAP. It outlines the Philippine agenda for adaptation and mitigation for the year 2011 to 2028. So mainly it focuses on public finances, financing that mga priority adaptation natin for vulnerable and marginalized community. And also, it also incorporate dito yung mga policy making natin to encourage the private sector to optimize the mitigation opportunities towards sustainable development. So, kaya nagkakaroon tayo ng mga zero waste plastic, mga ganong klaseng um, action plan natin. So, we also have Philippine Green Jobs Act of 2016. So, here, or the Republic Act 10771, it aims to foster low carbon, resilient, sustainable growth, and decent job creation by providing incentives to business that generates green jobs. Also, we also have the Philippine Development Plan of 2017 to 2022. So it was enacted 2016 by Rodrigo Duterte, signed off an ambition natin 2040. Ito yung long-term vision that articulates the Filipinos aspiring for strongly rooted, comfortable, and secure life. So, yun. Pansin ko lang sa group, medyo kabado kayo, but konting practice pa. So, sa class, may mga questions ba kayo sa ating reporter? Regarding climate change and energy crisis. Do we have questions sa mga reporters natin today? Class? Hello? Hello, class? Are you still there? Okay, wala. So, question ko sa group. So, as a mechanical engineering student, what do you think ano kaya magagawa natin to help in the fight for climate change? Yun na lang yung question ko sa group.
Sir,
Yes, Mr. Calliope.
hello po again, sir. As a future mechanical engineer, hoping um, we can build, or yes, sir, we can build soon a power plant that will help example that will help the Bicol region to produce a power plant that will parang siya na po mismo yung yung pagkukuhaan mismo ng electricity na hindi pa gagastos ng malaking pera, and parang magiging sentro na siya ng source of the electricity po dito sa Bicol region. So that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. So, isang malaking palakpak sa group ng climate change. Magaling kayo mag-discuss and also thank you sa pag-present. So, ready na ba yung next group natin? Thank you, Mr. Calliope and group for presenting. So, sa genetic engineering group, are you ready?
Opo, sir.
Okay, Mr. Arnel, please.
Opo. Ako po mag-present po, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, good evening po. Tinig po ba, sir?
You are visible online.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Before we start, let's see these some memes about our topic. Next slide, please. So, genetic engineering, a perfect day for banana fish. Next slide, please. Genetic engineering, sometimes you can go too far. Slide, please. Next slide. So you're telling me scientists are using genetic engineering to change animals into pigs. So next slide. Once again, good evening, everyone. We are the group that will present the topic about genetic engineering together with my group mates, Mr. Arnel Arabe, Bernard Paz, Brian Bragais, Jerwin Bersabe, Miko Imperial, and especially for Mr. Denver Valubilla, for the PowerPoint presentation. Next slide, please. So for the contents of our report, for the first part is the introduction, and the second part is about the history. Next is the basic concepts, the application and uses, ethical issues, and lastly, possible hazards. So next please. So again, I am Rino Villamea from Block B, and let's talk about genetic engineering. Next, please. So, genetic engineering. It is a term that was first introduced into our language in the 1970s to describe the emerging field of recombinant DNA technology. It is the process of modifying an organism's DNA to introduce new desirable traits. Many organisms, from bacteria to plant and animals, have been genetically modified for academic, medical, agricultural, and industrial purposes. Next, please. So it is also called recombinant DNA technology. Involves the group of techniques uses to cut up and join together genetic material, especially DNA from different biological species, and introduce the resulting hybrid DNA into organism in order to form new combination of heritable genetic material. So in this topic, we are talking about genes and engineering. So first of all, what do you mean by gene? So as remember in our senior high, especially in biology, when we say gene, it is the fundamental, physical, and functional unit of heredity. So kumbaga, siya ay yung structure and muka na mabubuo during biological process. So the genes are the genes make up the sequence of DNA or the genotypes. So yung parang double helix na parang kadena. So yun yung DNA. So genes are passed from parents to offspring and contain the information needed to specify traits. So genes are, are genes are arranged one after another on structures called chromosomes. So maaalala natin nung senior high is yung chromosome is yung parang bulate na X. So yun yung chromosome. So a chromosome contains a single long DNA molecule, only a portion of which corresponds to a single gene. So as we remember, DNA or the deoxyribonucleic acid stored a code made up of four chemical bases. So first is the adenine, second is guanine, third is cytosine, and last is thymine. DNA bases pair up with each other. So adenine is for thymine and cytosine is for guanine to form units called base pairs. So the genotypes or the DNA together with other factors. So example of these factors is environmental factors like the reproduction para sa mga animals, humans, yung pag nag-meet sila, and pollination para sa mga flowering plants and etc. So the genotypes together with the other factors determine the phenotypic trait of an organism. So pag sinabi naman natin phenotypic trait, it is ito yung magiging itsura ng organism after the process of genotype and yung sinasabing other factor. So dito sa other factor is papasok yung engineering. So ano exactly ang ginagawa ng engineers? So engineers design, evaluate, develop, test, modify, install, inspect, and maintain a wide variety of product and systems. So in simple words, genetic engineering is the process in which engineers modify or create an organism by combining the DNA of two different organisms to produce a new and unique one. And syempre, with the help of science and technology. And it is done from bacteria to plants and animals for academic and medical, agricultural, and industrial purposes. So all living things undergo in this process is called genetically modified organisms or GMOs. Next slide, please. So in 1973, biochemist Herbert Boyer and Stanley Cohen developed genetic engineering by inserting DNA from one bacteria into another bacteria. So sa first genetic engineering is bacteria from one bacteria into another bacteria. So in 1983, the first genetically engineered plant was developed by Michael W. Bevan and Richard B. Flavel and Mary Del Chilton. They infected tobacco with agrobacterium transformed in an antibiotic resistance gene, and through tissue culture techniques were able to grow the new plant containing the resistant genes. So that's all for my part. Thank you for listening.
Sino na yung next na reporter? Okay, Mr. Brian.
Good afternoon, sir. Narinig na po.
Okay na, clear na. Okay. Please proceed, Mr. Brian.
Genetic engineering is the science of manipulating genetic materials of an organism. The first artificial genetic modification accomplished using biotechnology was transgenesis, the process of transferring genes from one organism to another, first accomplished by Herbert Boyer and Stanley Cohen in 1973. Next slide. The first genetically modified animal was a mouse created in 1974 by Rudolf Jennings. Next slide. In 1976, the technology was commercialized with the advent genetically modified bacteria that was produced somatostatin, followed by insulin in 1978. Next slide. In 1983, an antibiotic-resistant gene was inserted into tobacco, leading the first genetically engineered plant. Advances followed that scientists to manipulate and add genes to a variety of different organisms and induce a range of different effects. Next slide. Plants were the first commercialized with virus. The first genetically modified food was the flower saber tomato, marketed in 1994. Next slide. In the year 2000, a paper published in Science introduced golden rice, the first food developed with increased nutrient value. Next slide. By the year 2010, 29 countries, including the Philippines, had planted commercialized biotech crops. That's all for me. Thank you.
Good evening. This is basic concepts. Next slide. To understand the basic techniques used to work with nucleic acids, remember that nucleic acids are macromolecules based on nucleotides, a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogenous base. The phosphate groups on these molecules each have a net negative charge. An entire set of DNA molecules in the nucleus of eukaryotic organisms is called the genome. DNA has, has two complementary strands linked by hydrogen bonds between the paired bases. Next slide. Unlike DNA in eukaryotic cells, RNA molecules leave the nucleus. Messenger RNA or mRNA is analyzed most frequently because it represents the protein coding genes that are being expressed in the cell. Next slide. To study or manipulate nucleic acids, DNA must first be extracted from cells. Most nucleic acid extraction techniques involve steps to open the cell and then the use of enzymatic reactions to destroy all undesirable macronucleus. Here are the steps of extracting DNA. First, cells are broken open using detergent solution containing buffering compounds. Second, prevent degradation and contamination. Macromolecules such as proteins and RNA are inactivated using enzymes. Next slide, please. The DNA is then brought out of solution using alcohol. The resulting DNA, because of it is made of long polymers, forms a gelatinous mass. Next slide. Nucleic acids can be isolated from cells for the purposes of further analysis. By breaking open the cells and enzymatically destroying all other major macromolecules, fragmented or whole chromosomes can be separated based on size by gel electrophoresis. Short stretches of DNA can be amplified by PCR. DNA can be cut and subsequently spliced together. By restriction enzymes, the molecules and cellular techniques of biotechnology allow researchers to genetically engineer organisms, modifying them to achieve desirable traits. Reverse genetic methods, a gene is mutated or removed in some way to identify its effect on the phenotype of the whole organism to determine its function. Next slide, please.
Good morning, good evening, sir. My name is Arnel Lurby Jr. and I will be discussing the applications of genetic engineering. So application and its uses. Genetic engineering has applications in medicine, research, industry, and agriculture, and then can be used on a wide range of plants, animals, and microorganisms. Number one, medicine. Mass-produce insulin. Um, it is possible to mass-produce insulin using recombinant DNA. Recombinant DNA is a technology scientists developed that made it possible to insert a human gene into the genetic material of a common bacterium. This recombinant microorganism could now produce the protein encoded by the human gene. Scientists build the human insulin gene in the laboratory. Then they remove a loop of bacterial DNA known as a plasmid and insert the human insulin gene into the plasmid. Researchers return the plasmid to the bacteria and put the recombinant bacteria in large fermentation tanks. There, the recombinant bacteria use the gene to begin producing human insulin. Scientists harvest the insulin from the bacteria and purify the substance for use as a medicine for people. B. Human growth hormones. A very good example of a human growth hormone is Cyzen. Cyzen is human growth hormone produced by mammalian cells by genetic engineering. It is identical with hypophyseal GH, as regards various physical and chemical parameters. A number of tests did not reveal an alien protein at the 1 ppm level, nor the presence of viruses, and the DNA level is below the detection range. Follistatin, or infertility treatment. Gonal F and follistatin contain 75 IU of FSH in each vial and are made by cloning the gene which codes for human FSH. The gene is inserted into mammalian cell cultures which then produce FSH. These drugs are given subcutaneously using a specific designed pen. D. Human albumin, and E. Monoclonal antibodies. An- It is an antibody produced artificially through genetic engineering and related techniques. Production of monoclonal antibodies was one of the most important techniques of biotechnology to emerge during the last quarter of 20th century. Anti-hemophilic factors, letter F. It is naturally occurring protein in the blood that helps blood to clot. A lack of anti-hemophilic factor 8 is the cause of hemophilia A. Human anti-hemophilic factor works by temporizing levels of factor 8 in the blood to aid in clotting. And G, the vaccines. A very good example of the product of genetic engineering is the core antigen of HBV, which is hepatitis B virus. It is a valuable diagnostic reagent and that is finding important use in immunological studies of particular pertinence to vaccine development. Number two, research. Organisms are genetically engineered to discover functions of a certain gene. Number three, industry. Transforming microorganisms such as bacteria or yeast or insect mammalian cells with a gene coding for useful protein. B. Mass quantities of the protein can be produced by growing the transformed organism in bioreactors using fermentation, then purifying the protein. And number four, agriculture. Created genetically modified crops or genetically modified organisms. A pomato. It is a grafted plant that is produced by grafting together a tomato plant and a potato plant.
So, be- so before we proceed to the ethical issues, we know that genetic engineering has many positive impact on the field of science and technology. But several issues have also been raised as regards to the acceptance of this technology. These concerns range from ethical issues to the lack of knowledge on the effects genetic engineering may have. One major concern is that once an altered gene is placed in an organism, the process cannot be reversed. That's why the public reaction to the use of DNA or DNA in genetic engineering has been mixed. And now, here are the ethical issues that involves genetic engineering. So for the first one, it is the religious beliefs. When asked specifically about their own religious or moral views about biotechnology, most Christians and a plurality of Muslims say that they are opposed to moving genes from one species to another. Overall, 57% of Protestants oppose this view, followed by Catholics with 52% and Muslim with 46%, while Jews had the most favorable view of the technology with 55% in favor and 35% opposed. Next. Next is the release of GMOs into the environment. GMOs, or what we call genetically modified organism, presents an exciting range of possibilities for feeding the global populations and preventing deadly diseases. However, these promises are not without any potential threats. Some, some of the ethical issues that need to be always considered includes the social concerns like using a gene from animal introduced into plant through genetic engineering may raise the social concern related with, vegetarian nature of the GMO plant. And also, with the addition of new genetic material through genetic engineering, It could cause the reactivation of these inactive pathways or otherwise increase the levels of toxic substances within the plants, which could be harmful for us people to consume. Next slide. Another thing is that if we're not careful, it could cause or create new viruses. An accident in engineering the genetics of a virus or bacteria, for example, could result in a stronger type, which could cause a serious epidemic when released. This could be fatal in human genetic engineering, creating problems ranging from minor medical problems to the death of millions of people. And the last thing is the genetically modified babies. With the increased ability to control and manipulate embryos present many possibilities for improving the health of children. But these possibilities are coupled with potential social repercussions that could have negative consequences in the future. Ultimately, genetically modified babies represent great potential in the field of medicine and scientific research. But there remain many ethical questions that still needed to be addressed as of now.
Next is the possible hazards of genetic engineering. Beyond the advantages of genetic engineering, I will cite six hazards of genetic engineering, or what we call disadvantages. The first is the nutritional value of foods can be less. When animals grow and mature quickly, the nutritional value of that product can be reduced. This can be seen in poultry products today with the white stripping that is found in meat products. That stripping is a fat deposit that was created often in the breast meat because of the rapid growth of the bird. In chickens, Good Housekeeping reports that this can increase the fat content of the meat consumed by over 220%. At the same time, the amount of the protein that is received is also reduced. Second is the pathogens adapt to the new genetic profiles. We know that genetic engineering can create a natural resistance against certain pathogens for plants and animals. But the natural evolutionary process is geared toward creating pathways. Bacteria and viruses evolve a resistance to the resistance that is created by the genetic engineering efforts. This causes the pathogens to become stronger and more resistant than they normally would be, potentially creating future health concerns that are unforeseen. The third is the negative side effects that are unexpected. Genetic engineering is guaranteed to make a change. Many of those changes are positive, creating more and healthier foods. But on the other hand, some of those changes, however, can be negative and unexpected. Making a plant become more tolerant to drought might also make that plant become less tolerant to direct sunlight. Animals may be modified to produce more milk but have a shortened lifespan at the same time, so farmers suffer a greater livestock. Next, the amount of diversity developed can be less favorable. At some point, genetically engineered plants and animals make it into the wild and interact with domestic species. This results in a crossing of natural and artificial organisms. The engineered organisms often dominate, resulting in only a modified species over several generations, reducing the diversity that is available. Fifth is the cooperated genetic engineering can have costly consequences. Many companies copyright their genetic engineering processes or products to maintain their profitability. If a farmer plants genetically modified crops and the pollination process causes another farmer in the field over to have those modified crops grow, there have been precedents for legal actions against the unauthorized farmer. This can have several costly consequences, from few farmers wanting to work to a higher cost for the seeds that are planted. Lastly, is the sixth hazard of genetic engineering. This knowledge and technology can be easily abused. Genetic engineering in humans is being used to treat specific disorders that threaten the health or well being of individuals. In time, the approach in humans could be like what is already being done with plants and animals. Genetic engineering can change specific traits which would create human outcomes that are ethically questionable or easily abused. So that's the six possible hazards of genetic engineering. That is the end of our report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Genetic Engineering Group, for the informative presentation. So discuss, they also gave some examples of the steps of how genetic engineering is conducted. So also they also given applications and also uses like some medicine, the mass production of insulin, human growth hormones, polystein, human albumin, and also vaccine. So importante din siya sa research, sa industry like agriculture. So also they also cited some ethical dilemmas, which is some mga religious beliefs that some of our religious community do not approve this kind of procedure or projects. Uh, we are genetically modifying some crops, ano pa ba? Also genetically modified babies. So they also cited some possible hazards of genetic engineering or some disadvantages. It is true that um, people may tend to abuse this kind of procedure. So yun, may mga ethical dilemmas. It could lead to um, pandemic like today. We don't know if the COVID-19 is a lab genetically modified virus. So wala tayong evidence nun, no? So that could be some possible hazards dun. So for the group, may questions kayo regarding sa genetic engineering sa reporters natin today? Plus, may clarifications ba kayo na gusto nyong tanungin or may questions kayo sa reporters natin? Hello? Are you still there?
Yes, sir. For me po, sir, wala namang pong tanong.
Okay, sige, ako na lang magtatanong. For the genetic engineering group, sa ngayon, di ba na-cite nyo yung mga um, advantages ng genetic engineering and also some disadvantages. In your own opinion, do you agree with regards to genetically modified babies or enhancement of enhancement of human? So enhancement meaning you have a longer lifespan, you are more intelligent, sabihin natin perfect build, perfect baby. So yun. And sa tingin nyo, who can avail this kind of procedure? Yun. Yun yung question ko sa inyo. Do you agree with genetically modified humans to be produced?
So for me sir, yes. Basta
Mhm.
sir, yung purpose niya is for the better of all. For the better of the world. Yun lang sir.
So, follow-up questions. Who can avail these services? Who can avail this kind of services?
Sir, excuse me po.
Yes, Mr.
For me, sir, no.